You're ready to be premature all over again.
Wow, that's impressive.
Quick
bro.
reset.
Now,
Quick reset.
Last night was Ramos Jizz.
Freudian slip.
Who knew the job was pro bono?
I was so high that I shit myself at some point.
Okay, I can still hear somebody. Everybody mute. Goddamn, you're killing me.
My SEAL Team 6 went to SEAL Team 12.
There's nothing wrong with punching above your weight.
I thought you'd get better.
Well,
I don't know what's worse. You're a ginger or you've been vaccinated.
You sit around and drink and solve the world's problems, right?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hear my voice again. You know it's a new week. It's a new topic. Some things just never change. Some things do. But I am fortunate enough to have these three wonderful gentlemen with me today. The four horsemen in the studio. How's everybody doing?
What?
Yeah,
We're all here.
Well,
We
my
are.
transformation has begun.
we are here. This will be an interesting one. Let's see how this goes. We'll dive into the psychology of this podcast in just a moment. But before we do that, let's jump into our drinks. I'm going to start with you, Grinch, and we're going to find out what you are drinking today. So go for it.
All right. I haven't tried it yet, but I'll
Hadn't
show
tried
it
it.
off. It's called the Hypnosis.
The hypnosis.
Yeah, it's pretty good. 2 ounces.
And then he
of-
moves on. He's like, next.
2 ounces. Well, it's actually the glass is like flush, and rather than me risk dumping it down my face, I'm gonna deal with that in a second.
Fair enough.
2 ounces of vodka, 2 ounces of Hypnotique liqueur, if that's how you pronounce that.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of like a citrusy soda. In this case, I use Sprite.
So just a lemon lime soda of some kind.
Yeah. And this came off of what was this that came from? Cocktail Builder.
Cocktail Builder. Is that an app? Did you pay for that?
No, actually, I searched for a name and I found the drink, and then I wanted to make sure I gave credit where credit was due for where it came from.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then there you go. What is it? The hypnosis? Hypnosis. But it's got Hypnotica or however, Nautique or whatever, however you say
Yeah,
it.
because isn't it like TIQUE?
Yeah, something like that.
Like HYPNOTIQUE.
Sure. Hypnosis. All right. Well, there you go. You're right. Oh, I should just use my feet, my TSA feet, and hypnotize Haas. Haas, I think I already know where this is going, but I'm going to ask anyway. What are you drinking today, brother?
I'm drinking in all of y'all's awesomeness.
Oh, just soaking it in.
Soaking it in.
It's like osmosis. It just right through the
mean, you know.
pores. Just
Yep.
being in the presence. I know you've been feeling under the weather, so I'm assuming you're not drinking for that reason, or at least putting down some water.
I am not consuming alcohol on this.
OJ?
Mark the occasion. No.
Okay.
No, mark the occasion. First time, not
Marking
drinking.
it down. Marking it down. Okay. Not drinking. That's you got to do what you got to do. I mean, I
It's like
respect
drinking Drano. Sure, it cleans you out. It leaves you hollow.
hollow inside. At the end of the day, we said this when we started this 3 years ago. If there's an issue and you're not going to drink, that's your business. It doesn't change the dynamic. And
Doesn't
we
mean I
want
don't want to be. Doesn't
No,
mean
I
I
know.
still don't enjoy it. But
we'll do it. We'll do it for you.
There are occasions where abstaining is a good thing, and this is one of those times.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I hope you feel better. Thank you for being here. I'm glad you're here. All right, Mac, let's move on to you, sir. What exactly are you drinking today?
Yeah, so after the last couple of weeks of getting kind of ridiculed for, constant Moscow mules, single
Ridiculed.
ingredient.
But
This group,
Single-
no.
Oh,
no,
yeah. Single
that would
ingredient
never
drinks.
happen.
I said I gotta step up my game this week. So, I spent some time scouring the internet, as we all do when you're looking for a new cocktail to drink. And I came across this new website. Had a lot of really good information on it. And I found this recipe. It was from a website called peoplestemple.com. And it calls for 2 quarts of water, a cup of sugar, and a packet of Kool-Aid mixed with 2 ounces of cyanide.
Okay.
So
Sorry,
I
I
couldn't
shouldn't
find
have said that.
cyanide. So I flipped that with rum
With something else.
and made the people's drink.
You
Nice.
pussy. You
Nicely done.
pussy.
And it's very, very good.
Kool-Aid, sugar, water, cyanide. I mean, rum.
I flipped the cyanide for the rum. You can't get cyanide in North Carolina on Sunday,
Understood.
apparently.
Yeah,
So
fuck, man,
I
that's
had to go with
ridiculous.
something different.
I think
Probably
you'd
should-
have been better off with absinthe though, because yeah,
Not
it's
so
got that
much.
same bitter taste. You know?
There is actually a drink called the Jonestown Kool-Aid, which I am
No
drinking.
shit.
I'm drinking a variation of that. So,
Okay. Okay.
there is one extra ingredient in mine. I'm sorry, two extra ingredients in mine because it's a different one. But yeah, there is a Jonestown Kool-Aid cocktail. So there you go, Mac. You're drinking what is it? The People's Kool-Aid.
The people's Kool-Aid.
That's
People's
excellent.
Kool-Aid.
Not made by The Rock.
I was about to say that sounds rock adjacent.
That's it. I should have started out that, today on the show, we've got Jim Jones, Marshall Applewhite, David Koresh, do it that way. That's who's in the studio.
Mhm.
Some people would get the connections, some may not. I don't know. But so I'm going to do mine. I am drinking what's simply called the Kool-Aid. And so that is equal parts. It's all 1 ounce. It's equal parts vodka, triple sec, slow gin, and amaretto. And you put that over ice, you shake it up, you pour it in a glass, and then you add cranberry juice. And of course, my daughter's like, there's no Kool-Aid in that. I'm like, I didn't create the fucking recipe. I'm just drinking it, but it's called the Kool-Aid. So, Haas, since you're not drinking,
Yep.
This is for you.
Can you do that with your toe next time?
Stop. I swear to
fucking
God,
can.
I will log the fuck off.
And then I'll drink it. It is,
Suck it off the toes.
Nasty.
it's not bad,
But
but
you
it
know
is-
the money you could make doing that on OnlyFans.com.
That's what I'm saying. I could pay off some shit, get out of the state.
Yeah, I got a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it is. It's equal parts.
I know what I spend.
Yeah, it's equal parts, but it is heavy on the amaretto, which is a surprise. I guess it's just the amaretto, even though it's equal parts, tends to be or seems to be overpowering. But I don't mind the amaretto. But that's what I'm drinking. It's called Kool-Aid, the Kool-Aid. So, all right. So there we go. Cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Enjoy
Cheers.
your cyanide laden Kool-Aid. And
This actually is pretty good, by the way.
let's go to work.
Yeah.
Looks cool.
All right.
I'll tell you that. It's that hypnotique.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
So
Yeah.
in case you missed it, if me mentioning Jim Jones, Marshall Applewhite, David Koresh, Charles Manson, throwing out those names, things like that, if you haven't figured out where we're going, then I don't know where you've been for the last 60 years. But what we're going to talk about today, sorry, let me back up. It is the 30th anniversary on April 19th, 2023 was the 30th anniversary of the WACO. What would you even call it? It wasn't a massacre. They did it to themselves. They set themselves on fire. Debacle.
Debacle. Shit show.
Oh, and it was most certainly a debacle.
It
right?
was.
We all agree on that.
It started February 28th, 1993, and then culminated after 51 days on April 19th with the death of every member that hadn't been released, every member inside the compound, 80 some odd members or 80 members, women, men, children.
I think like 2 made it out that day.
That three.
Right.
I
Three?
think,
Because
I think it was
Thibodeau.
3.
Because what
No, it's
David
3.
Thibodeau.
David
two-
Thibodeau
yeah,
was
2
one of
others.
them. Yeah.
Guerrero and someone else, I think, or something.
but-
like that.
But in light of that, we thought it might be a good idea to do some reflection, conversation, debate around cults in general, the ideology behind cults, the psychology of cults, how they're able to pull in members. Because to me, that's the biggest thing. It's like, how do they manage to find members and pull them in and in essence, brainwash them to do the things that they do? And so we will touch on a few. There are some major ones out there. But, if you were not old enough to remember 1993, if you were not born yet, if you're a listener, or if you were there and you remember watching this shit on TV every night, it was a debacle between the ATF, the FBI, the members of the Branch Davidian compound, and it eventually descended into chaos when they set fire to their own compound on the 19th of April, resulting in the death of whoever was left inside.
Yeah, I want to say it was 84.
Something like that. It's in the 80s. Yeah. But so that's what we're talking about today. And we're going to probably touch on a few major ones. I've this week been looking up some major cults throughout history, some that I didn't know about, some that I did. And then obviously, if you have had the time to go out to Netflix, there is a new documentary. It's a 3-show miniseries about WACO. HBO did one. Paramount Plus has one. So, I mean, you can find that. There's Jonestown information. There's Heaven's Gate information. That was based on the Hale-Bopp comment in the mid to late 90s and those people in California. So there have been a number, obviously, probably the most well-known, you hear about Charles Manson. and the Manson family, obviously Jim Jones and the Jonestown Massacre. What was it, 913 or
909
nine
drank it, and
ish?
then I think if, like whatever
A
more
couple got
were
shot,
addicted or forced to drink, but
whatever it was.
909 willingly consumed cyanide, a drink laced with cyanide.
Right. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so just try to get some understanding, if we can, about why the fuck these things exist, how they managed to pull these people in, and then how do they end in a mass suicide? 900 people drinking the Kool-Aid, 80 some odd people setting themselves on fire, and so on and so forth. So that's what we're talking about. Gentlemen, who would like to go ahead and start us off?
Oh, I'm going to
Well,
go ahead.
certainly. Go ahead, man.
I was going to say, I'm going to go ahead and kick the hornet's nest because you missed
Go for it, Jim
probably
Jones.
one of the, well, if I could only get that haircut.
Don't
and I'm
say
talking about-
Scientology, because we'll get there.
No,
Okay.
you missed, you left out the Pope.
The what?
The Pope.
The who? Is that a cult I've missed?
Apparently.
No.
Organized
Well,
religion.
Organized religion. Fair enough. Well, but if you look up what cults are, they tend to be small groups. And that is part of it. Small groups, not massive fucking scale.
But if you look at it, a lot of people will say, cult plus time equals religion.
I like that.
I mean,
That should be on a shirt.
I'm
really
not pushing
should.
back
Bumper,
on that.
bumper
Yeah.
sticker.
I mean, that's how
Definitely.
a lot of, and I know what you mean, right? I mean, typically
Yeah.
when you think of cult, you don't think of organized religion, but that's how a lot of them started. They started as breakaway sects from the original religion.
Well, Haas has breakaway sex every Friday night.
Damn right. And the experts from where I come say that those who study cults suggest that human need for comfort prompts people to seek out others and things to soothe their fears and anxieties. Sounds
And
like
that's
every
not
religion.
organized
Sounds like
religion.
every organized religion.
It
Yeah,
does,
but-
but one of the
it's
one of the key
the
principles.
key to a cult is, well, it's not all cults, right? It's when you start doing harm.
No,
Well,
It's not
I mean,
doing
I'll-
harm.
I'll read the definition per dictionary.com.
but it's
If that
there's
gets us
deviant
started.
Well, because
behavior.
if it's on the internet, it has to be true.
There's
It
deviant
is-
behavior related to cults.
It's a noun. A system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object, such as the cult of St. Olaf. A relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister, a misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing, quote, a cult of personality surrounding the leaders.
You mean
Yes.
like
Now,
God,
ironically,
or the Pope?
If you look down below, and some of the people also asked, it says, what's the difference between a cult and a religion? And it
Gotcha, buddy.
says,
I love you.
cult is a term that doesn't refer to religion at all, but is applied to a social group. Not
Right.
agreeing or disagreeing, just telling you what it says.
But again, there is a relationship between the ideology, the belief, whether it be religious, spiritual, or and the fact that deviant behavior exists, either
And
internal
I
to
think
the
that's
cult.
the key. That's
Well,
the key difference.
okay,
though, right,
okay,
is the
okay.
deviant behavior.
Hold
Okay.
on,
But
hold
now,
on.
I,
Yeah,
good,
No, no,
take it back.
wait,
Take it home, baby. Drive it.
I'm pretty sure, having sex with little boys might be deviant behavior.
Oh no, yeah. But you're talking.
That's just me. Don't get me wrong.
I'm not disputing that, but you're talking about deviant behavior. Well,
Yeah, uh-huh.
okay, all
Moving
right.
right
I was
on.
about to say you're talking about
Well,
deviant
but it wasn't
behavior
a
by
common-
just the what would you call them?
Leadership.
Leadership, right? Where in cults it tends to be pervasive throughout all of the members, but that's not entirely
Mm,
true.
that's
Not
not
necessarily.
Not at 100%
Let's just
accurate.
let's use Waco as the vignette to unpack some of that.
Yeah,
which,
well,
the reason Waco started, I mean, yes, you could say there were perceptions of deviant behavior, which was admitted by a number of folks, of like Koresh saying, you no longer get to have sex with your wife, I get to have
I
sex
get to
with
do
all
that.
of them.
right.
Now, deviant defined as departing from usual or accepted standards, especially in social or sexual behavior.
Right.
You could say yes. Now, from the outside, people were like, that's a weird compound.
Yeah,
On the
but to them, it
inside,
wasn't.
there's a whole
They-
there's a whole psychology that I'm sure
There
we're
was an
gonna get
agreed
to,
social construct, right?
they were all in, right?
Mhm.
All in.
Right.
But the whole thing that kicked off Waco was the intent to serve the warrant for the accumulation of modified weapons
Yeah.
and ammunition.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with the quote unquote deviant behavior. That was kind of an afterthought. And that was why the ATF was involved, because you're right. It was the accumulation and modification of the weapons that they were there to try and serve a warrant on, because that was the main thing. That was the main reason that they could obviously get in.
Well, and again, some of the stuff I saw, though, they knew deviant behavior was occurring inside the compound. They could never put together enough evidence
Well, that
to
was
pursue.
it, right? So this is how you go about doing it, right? It's
Right.
like, RICO cases with with the mobs.
You find an in.
You find a way to get in, and then you unpack everything else after the fact. Except in this case, there was nobody left to unpack.
Right.
And again, with WACO, I mean, just real quick, without, I know, again, we're talking kind of the broad psychology of following a cult, or what you consider otherwise intelligent people, which if you watch and I've only gotten partway into it,
Heaven's Gate.
The Heaven's Gate
On HBO.
I forget the sociologist that's asked, and she says, I frequently get asked if there's a personality type that's drawn to a cult, and she said no. And in actuality, it tends to be educated and highly educated people,
right,
that drift towards a cult, which is weird to me.
Yeah,
because the way they tend to come across in the fact that they drink the Kool-Aid so readily, you go, how can you be intelligent? But clearly there's something there. And Grinch, I know I made this distinction with you, Mac. I think I did it with you as well, is the correlation between cults and gangs. And I don't necessarily think, and my belief, and this is only my personal belief, is that people are attracted to both of those, not necessarily because they're dumb or their mental acuity doesn't, meet a certain level. I tend to think it's situational. It's something they're missing at home. It's something that they're absent with.
They don't have a home. They don't have
and so
a family,
they go into these things. And so I found an article by the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, and the article is called Comparison of Cults and Gangs, a Dimension of Coercive Power and Malevolent Authority. And just the abstract bit at the beginning says, groups regarded as cults have much in common with groups regarded as gangs in modern American society. They are similar in both groups. They are similar in that both groups restrict members' exercise of freedom in thought and belief. Both demand unquestioning obedience from their members. Both have self-appointed authoritarian leaders. And once a person joins both types of groups, they tend to undergo a certain predictable personality change. Cults, like gangs, fall into a realm of deviance, and both types of groups encourage members to become situationally dependent on group identity. Both gangs and cults recruit members based on the human need to be accepted and be a part of a group that will affirm personal significance. The primary difference between cults and gangs is that cults have their axial principle of organization based on spiritual, religious, ideological belief systems, while gangs, on the other hand, are commonly perceived to have no such well-developed belief system. Further, gangs are more sinister in terms of their use of violence against their own members and those of outside gangs. Disobedience in cult occasions, much less severe discipline and violence against non-cult members is not common behavior for cult members. So that's how the U.S. Department of Justice defines cults and gangs. Very similar in a lot of regards, and then showcasing the major
clear
differences.
Outliers.
Well, and what was that thing you read right out of the gates, Haas, of why people join?
Well, to seek others are things that soothe their fears and anxieties, right?
I think he was making the connection to religion.
Well,
how religion was a cult.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean,
there's a whole lot to unpack.
There's not one thread that connects all those that I could just pounce on right now. But certainly with cults, you said religious spirituality, and then there's a lot of blur between those two. I mean,
right.
using the Heaven's Gate, they mixed science fiction and religion.
Right.
Because they're one of, I think, one of the two UFO
driven
groups, typically.
Yep.
They were the two witnesses.
Didn't they say God was an alien or some shit like that? Is that what that was their main
and
thing,
they went by T and Doe or whatever, I think.
Yeah, the alien spacecraft to which they would be could be aboard was hidden in the Hale-Bopp comet in the 90s.
That was the Hale-Bopp comet.
That was the Hale-Bopp comet, and so in 97, obviously, they had to do away with their vehicle, and their vehicle was their body. to be able to get on board the spaceship. And like when you hear those things, and this is where you go, how can smart people be in groups like this? Because you go, did nobody go, what? Huh?
Right.
I got to do what?
This is the one I just honestly, I told you I couldn't keep watching because I was looking at people and going, you left your family.
Right.
You left your family behind to pursue nonsense because you just get told to like stare at the sky over. There was no plan. Like, no, I mean, I think a number of those interviews said there like nobody was in charge. There was no hierarchy. You just kind of got some direction. Whereas I at least understood the appeal of Jonestown, Jim Jones' approach, in that he provided. Now, he did say you give up everything to the church, but he actually had homes for the elderly. You had healthcare, you had dental. Now, you worked your ass off. I think he, they deliberately said you got worked for like, almost 20 hours a day, so you could never really free think.
And
then he
anything,
also
right.
tore down race barriers.
Right.
And so
that was one of the first kind of groups that did that, I think.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like it's bullshit too. I'm not suggesting like, oh, I might have fallen for that one, but I at least could connect with the appeal.
You could see where, an intelligent person might initially get involved and say, okay, yeah, I see. It's kind
the
of
appeal,
a free society, for lack of a better word, to some extent.
Well, again, the APA, the American Psychological Association, posted an article, and they were talking about this. And one of the panelists, there was a panel about cult mentality back in the early 2000s. And one of the panelists, Deborah Layton, was a member of Jonestown. And at age 18 in the early 70s, Layton was longing for a belonging. And so she was attracted to the People's Temple. And so she actually traveled to Jonestown. They got on a village where the People's Temple's followers kind of all went to escape racism, persecution, whatever. And she quotes it or cites it as saying the peaceful settlement appeared more like a concentration camp surrounded by armed guards where food was scarce. Followers were required to work long hours, Grinch, like you said. To me, that doesn't sound like a kumbaya. Hey, we're all sitting around the campfire, fucking playing a guitar and singing songs. Like, they were working the shit out of people, and as you mentioned, so you weren't going to be, you didn't have time to be free thinking.
It gave them purpose, maybe, right? And that's probably what they were searching for. Because I say most people, when they start looking at cults, are at a crossroads in their life, right? Something has gone on,
right?
And they're looking for some sort of a direction, and that's typically what they may find initially in joining a cult. And joining a cult is that purpose of, okay, so I'm going to work my ass off, but I'm going to live in this, kind of utopian, and I'm using that, because that's probably what they sell it as, utopian society where, we're tearing down, racial boundaries, and everybody's equal.
Right.
And in theory, it sounds good. It's just never put into practice that way.
And we should add the critical element in all of this is the central figure, or maybe 1-2 figures that are the centerpiece of it all. That drive
the authoritarian
without
leaders.
Koresh, even though Branch Davidians existed before Koresh, but without him, they wouldn't have gotten to that point.
Right.
Where he was holding them in and saying, well, I'm supposed to write my interpretation of this, that, or the other. And then the moment they're all supposed to leave, he's like, no, God said no. Which is borderline.
Well, God didn't say no.
Him saying, I said no.
God didn't say no.
Jim
God
Jones,
said, wait.
Right. Wait. And Jim Jones was, I mean, he came from Lynn, Indiana, like poor and destitute, to be like, he just came into his own with this persona and strength that was up in front of, sometimes hundreds and thousands of people. And they bought into it. And I mean, Charles Manson. I mean, some of these others, like, they're so mentally just effective.
Hey, don't talk about our. Don't talk
about the one alum from your college that.
There's more than one.
There's Newt Gingrich. Come on,
we got Newt.
Oh, was he? Oh God, that's not a step up. That's a step sideways. Let's be honest.
And charisma is defined as, if I'm going to keep running with this dictionary thing, compelling attractiveness or charm that can inspire devotion in others. A divinely conferred power or talent.
Right.
Now, I've seen some things about charisma that say it doesn't necessarily have to be hand in hand with authoritative, like an authoritative approach.
Right.
Uh, um, there's actually an article I was reading that was kind of separating that, saying, no, it's more like a fundamental understanding of those you're leading. Like, you know how to get more
The
out
psychology of,
of it. Yeah.
you know,
And like I said, I mean, it's so impressive. It seems like a lot of times that's used for bad,
Right.
not good.
Well, what's interesting is a group of psychologists. I mean, obviously, this being because everything I found, a lot of these groups stemmed out of the 60s and 70s. Like that's where they started.
that time frame, people were
A lot of
looking for
turmoil.
a lot of
Vietnam
turmoil in
War.
Vietnam War. People were looking for that peace, love,
Something to
hippie
belong
vibe,
to.
right? Yeah.
And in the mid 80s, a group of psychologists came forward and they formed a task force called the Deceptive and Indirect Methods of Persuasion and Control, DIMPAC. And they submitted a report to the APA that condemned cults for using brainwashing. But the APA's boards of social and ethical responsibility for psychology found the report unacceptable because they said it lacked too much scientific evidence and relied too heavily on sensational anecdotes and provided insufficient information for the APA to be able to take a position on the issue. And so, and that's what this article is talking about, is people then came forward again later and asked the APA to please look into these things, the psychological approach to cults, and define their position on why these things occur. And so you go, oh, well, in the mid 80s, these people did this, and had the APA potentially taken it seriously, maybe they'd have released a report or might have helped people, be looking into things like a David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, like the Hale Bopp Heaven's Gate people, that obviously, maybe they would have prevented those things had they been reviewing the psychological approach to these things. But that didn't happen. And the APA said, no, I'm sorry, we're not taking a position on it because we don't agree with your evidence.
So could we say that the military's a cult?
Well, yeah, I guess you could, right?
Interesting.
Because they tear down their people and rebuild them.
And some
to
say
think
to
and
some degree
function.
they might be some forms of brainwashing that go
Yeah.
on, that you're invincible and that you're to follow commands no matter what those commands are.
Now, I
And
don't know, because obviously Grinch's approach to the military versus what my experience with my brother going through boot camp, or my wife going through boot camp, or Haas, your brother going through boot camp. Like, obviously boot camp is their intent is the way they, what do they call it? When they deny you, like deprivation, like they deny you sleep, and they are yelling at you. The intent is to break you down so that they can then build you back up the way they want.
Well,
and I don't know, Grinch, with your approach, if it's different.
Yeah, I mean, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I mean, it's evolved with the times. Access to phones and that kind of stuff. It used to be like, it's an absolute hell no, is now more, maybe you get it on the weekends, maybe you don't. And there's just, in terms of, we used to call them smoke sessions. Like, that's not a thing anymore. Yes, the idea is to create a mentality of like order, because you need order and discipline in order to execute what you're doing, especially in a chaotic environment. That's the idea. And yes, I agree with the, you're sort of shedding that persona that you had before to become different. But at the core, you're not that different. I mean, it's not like a traumatic experience, like you went to war, you're that different. It's more, the idea is confidence and some other things go up, and you start learning, like, I can be a leader, But in particular, what I always focus on, and this is when I get really leery when I see drift in terms of focus, is everybody that's in the military swears an oath to the Constitution, not a person. Now, the word is, I will obey the orders of the president and the orders of the officers appointed over me. But at the end of the day, you swear an oath to the Constitution. And so the idea is you focused on protecting this great nation. Now, we can unpack that, sure, in terms of singing something every morning and saying the pledge and all that and what it's designed to do. We call it patriotism,
Right?
quote unquote.
So let me ask a question.
I mean, look, psychology is psychology. It's how you use it. So I can't outright say there is no overlap between what you're trying to achieve by shaping somebody.
And I think it goes back to the point Thor was trying to make a little bit earlier, right? I think for me, I mean, the word cult can include a lot of different areas. I think where it becomes problematic is when that deviant behavior starts to take over, where you're convincing people to drink Kool-Aid to kill themselves, or release gases on trains in, I think was it Korea or Japan?
Yeah, the Amun
Um,
Shinriko or the
Yeah.
Shinriko cult. Yes.
or
AUMSHINRIKY.
Yeah.
as I just shared in the chat, if you haven't seen it yet, annihilate an entire demographic of Jewish people.
Right.
Right. That's when I think it takes over.
Yeah,
If,
cult of personality.
if you're a cult and you just want to go, hey, look, I want to go live on a commune. I'm going to give up all my possessions for the greater good, but we're not doing harm to anybody. Hey, you know what? So be it. That's your right to do.
Kumbaya, baby.
Right. But when it starts impacting other people negatively, I think that's where cults kind of get a bad name, right? Because again, we can use the word cult for a lot of different groups.
Well,
some are good, some are bad.
now, of course, let's go the other way because we're talking about cults, by and large, small groups. Mac, you came out of the gate going religion's a cult. And now Haas has followed that up with military, potentially a cult. So I'm going to go in the other direction. Are families cults? Families, the family dynamic, right? You're a child. You're born into that situation. You don't think for yourself. Your parents do that. We tend to follow our parents' ideology without question initially.
Up to a certain point.
Right. Whatever.
See, and I think that's where it's a little bit different, right?
Well, again, you have people that grow up and they do the exact same thing their parents did because they believed what the Kool-Aid, they drank the Kool-Aid. Mom and dad believe this way. Mom and dad hate this way, or they're bigots this way, or they whatever. And my daughter was saying, she goes, I didn't get a choice about religion.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Well, because her mother
should we dive into that?
No, but her mother had a belief like you're going to go this way. I'm not that way. I'm like you
and
think
that's
and
okay.
do what you want.
Well, and that's okay up until they have the ability
to think for
critical
themselves.
Thinking, right?
But some families don't allow for that. Some
No,
families
that's right.
don't want you thinking for themselves. So my question would be, are families technically small versions of cults? If the military can be considered
I think you
one,
could say yes, depending on what your definition of a cult is, right? Typically, when you think of the word cult, you think of those deviant groups, right?
I think a CrossFit gym is what I think of.
You think of what?
You might not be that far off. Again, it doesn't have the deviant behavior. Well, I mean, when you wake up the next morning, maybe you feel like it's
everybody's
deviant.
wearing those knee-high socks.
Yeah, but Haas would say I'm a cult if I made my kids walk through TSA barefoot without giving them a choice. That's deviant behavior as far as he's concerned.
Definitely deviant behavior, no doubt about it.
But is that?
I
don't know.
I was simply posing the question. That's and
it's a good
would
question,
that fall into cultish?
Yeah, I just come back to the definition: system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object.
Right.
I mean, if you take that definition, it's pretty broad.
Right.
We just tend to think of cults like synonymous with the deviant behavior that's mentioned in there, and a really bad outcome when it's all said and done. I mean, I would submit Scientology strikes me as a fucking cult because it's just weird. It's just weird.
When I Googled cults, it was the number one that came up on the list of the 10 most notorious cults. It was number one. And
the word cult was around for a long time, but it didn't really gain mainstream popularity as far as, using it in vernacular until the Jim Jones incident, and that's typically where people point back to, if you're thinking of the word cult with that negative connotation, that's the initial one that most people look at. But as we've said, if you take cult just at face value for the definition of the word, clearly, as we've unpacked already, there's a lot of different groups that could fall into that definition.
And obviously, I think it's the only term in which cult is used pejoratively, right? Because we talk about cult classic movies, but that doesn't have a negative connotation.
You're right. It's a subset of people who really latched on to something that like the mainstream did.
Right.
But Rocky Horror Picture Show. Yeah.
When we talk about groups of people doing things, then it does become a pejorative term. It takes on that negative connotation going, oh, that's a cult. And it's like, oh, okay. And again, I think throughout history, those groups, those subsects have shown us in terms of their behavior and the things that they've done that, yeah, they are negative, but someone somewhere bought into them because people joined them. Scientology is no different.
This is an article from Penn Today, Penn State. And this is where I got cult is a term that doesn't refer to religion at all, but is applied to a social movement. People have intuitive feelings about how the word cult should be used, even when an organization or movement meets the criteria of a new religion. Take, for example, Scientology and Mormonism. Both were new religious movements that have evolved into a general understanding or definition of a religion. And then it goes on to point that Scientology and Mormonism have outlived their charismatic leaders, and they have openly published their beliefs as scripture.
Right.
So, I mean, to your point, Mac, like, yeah, I don't disagree that one can morph into another. I will agree, or I'll also say I agree with the notion that if I hear that term, I almost instantly assume some ulterior
Bad
motive or bad
Yeah.
outcome, or somebody's getting freaking bamboozled, you know.
Yeah, and that's typically, you're right. That's what you think of when you hear the word cult. You know, the Jim Jones, the Heaven's Gate, you know, WACO, the Branch Davidians.
Manson.
To your point, right? I mean, you know, the Branch Davidians were around well before David Koresh. They just took a different approach when he, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a minute since I've watched the documentary. He killed the former leader, or definitely
this?
escorted him out of control.
Who's this? I'm
David
sorry.
Koresh.
So I actually just watched it today, so I can tell you. What
It was
happened
actually-
is he befriended the head of the cult,
Who was a
Uh,
female?
who was a woman.
A woman.
Older
And
than
when
him.
she, yeah,
Yes.
and when she passed away, there was a
The son.
void of power,
void.
and it was supposed to go to her son, correct? And he, Koresh, rounded up a bunch of the men who were on his side, and I think assaulted and attacked the son.
Yes.
And the police were called.
Shot him, I
and-
believe.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was shot or stabbed or something. But they Koresh, those guys were arrested, but the jury came back hung,
Yes.
and he was never fully tried. So when he went back, I guess because of that, he went back and leveraged it. See, it's God's divine right power that I'd be in charge or some shit, and that's how he filled the vacuum.
Right. But yes, it was a female that was running it.
Lois Roden.
Yes. And then when she passed, the son stepped up, but so did David, and they had a power struggle. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Right. The widow
So-
of Benjamin Roden, who was the leader of the sect.
Yeah.
She was in her late 60s. Koresh eventually began to claim that God had chosen him to father a child by Lois, who would be the chosen one.
So you look at that, right? I mean, clearly they were a cult before, but there was no deviant intent
Right. Until David Koresh
until
took
David
over.
Koresh took over
100%.
with his, you know, philosophy and thought process.
It is interesting. One of the things I found from a psychological standpoint is when we talk about cults and you look at all of the stuff behind cults, what they do, the things that they involve in that deviant behavior, sex tends to be one, pedophilia tends to be one, sex trafficking, things like that. And even with those things in place, those statistics in place, do you know that women make up 70% of the members of cults? I did not know that. That's
I
fucking
mean,
ridiculous. Around the globe, according to research, women make up a whopping 70% of cult membership.
I mean, that honestly makes a little bit of sense to me from the standpoint of,
Men don't want other men around.
well, to some extent, right? I mean, you know, if you look at Koresh, you know, and what's at the LDS, you know,
By the
you're
way-
supposed to have multiple wives.
Right.
So
Koresh is-
initially,
Koresh is not his real name, or not his original.
no, it wasn't. It was
Vernon
something-
Howell.
Yeah, but
I'd
you
have
know,
changed my name too.
how are you going to get to power? You know, as Vernon Howell.
That's right.
Mhm. That's not a Hollywood name. You
No,
No, that doesn't
would
sell.
be-
Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't necessarily care to unpack the whole thinking behind this, but it was, I guess, the original founder said he wanted to pursue like a Davidian approach to religion. I'm paraphrasing because I lost my place.
So
Don't
a
wait on
few-
me because I
That's
got
okay.
and clearly that's one of those situations where, you know, something probably started out with good intent and then,
Right.
you know, was driven way off the rails by, you know, an individual.
because I think that cult started in 55 and obviously culminates in the mass death in 93. So for a number of years, they just kind of coasted through.
Nobody heard of him or nobody knew
Right,
about
they
him
weren't
outside
an
of that
issue.
area, probably.
Exactly. And then obviously this guy steps in, takes over, and shit goes sideways fairly quickly.
And that's the thing, you know, as you look at a Jim Jones, if you look as David Koresh, Charles Manson, and some of these others, I don't know if they are just so certain of what they've convinced themselves that there's no give. Because if you watch in their interviews, it's just this, and it's a power, and I assume they kind of come into their own with it as they learn it, and then they perfect it. Like, I mean, using Hitler, the, I think what I've heard is, to everybody's knowledge, he didn't kill anyone, yet somehow inspired the largest genocide in the history of our world. And you just keep asking how. And I think, I mean, we clearly see some of them make it out, right? When it got to like some critical moment, they were just, they go, well, you know what?
They
I don't
started
know.
thinking for themselves and going,
Yeah.
"Oh shit, what
It's like
what
the
am I
fog,
doing?" Right?
the fog cleared, and it was interesting too, watching the one about Heaven's Gate as the followers started coming on board, because you could see them beginning to emulate the speech rhythm and how they phrase things, and it was almost like they were trying to be exactly like them in their mannerisms, somehow thinking this was translating into conviction, and I'm gonna get there. And
No,
part
but
of you keeps wondering, like, if we were behind closed doors, bro, to use Haas's.
Yeah, exactly.
but that one was on HBO, right? Is that because I don't think I've
Heaven's
seen
Gate.
that one
Yes,
yet.
yes.
Yeah,
Heaven's
Yeah, I
Gate
need to
is on
watch that
HBO
HBO.
one.
Max,
Okay.
Yep. And there are a lot of documentaries out there relating to cults, which I managed to find. Another one, I believe it may be on Netflix, called Wild Wild Country. Have you guys heard of
Yeah.
this one?
Which is
This is
that brings up another interesting point, that if you look at a lot of the kind of underlying philosophies and beliefs, a lot of it comes out of like the India
Buddha,
area, right?
right?
It's like, and again, I think it goes back to that kind of, peace and love, atmosphere coming out of the 60s and 70s.
But then it
Right.
gets
I mean,
bastardized and it gets transformed
Well,
into
yeah,
something
I
entirely
barely know
different.
what I'm talking about in this, so somebody could just be like, "You're a fucking idiot." But
You're in the military, which we know is a
well,
cult.
never
So that's not true.
stopped us.
with Christianity, spirituality is God, Jesus. There is no place for like nature and freaking. I mean, well, they supplant it, right? They're like, "Well, you can see God's work everywhere," instead of some of these other religions that do have a spiritual component of meditation. Um, do crystals matter? That kind of shit, right?
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, it's. I mean, we already had our religious podcast, so I think it's pretty insidious with its teaching. But if you think about it, it's kind of come up with an answer for everything to allow no weird room, nothing sneaky to get in there. To be like, I found that if I stare at this tree, the tree talks to me. The fuck it does. That's Jesus talking from that tree.
Just the
Just a
burning
couple.
You
bush,
don't
right?
meditate,
Yeah.
you pray.
Right.
Like
Just a couple, just so again, so people are aware if they would like to go out and check these out. So obviously, the Wild Wild Country on Netflix. It's a 6-part series that chronicles the rise and fall of Rajneesh movement, which is what it's about. The Buddha Field Cult, Holy Hell, which is another one. And again, I don't necessarily know where all of these are located in terms of being able to find them, but it talks about the members and it paints a chilling portrait of the group founder, Michael Rostan. Scientology, going clear. There you go. Scientology being a fucking cult. There's a documentary that obviously gives you the history of the religion, founder L. Ron Hubbard, and the manipulative and life-threatening policies under current leader David Miscavige, whoever that is. FLDS, the
Moscovich.
Prophet's
Why,
Prey.
why is it you got Crash, this guy? Why are Davids
It's
rampant
the
and leading?
symbolism of the name.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing that's interesting. Like this FLDS, Prophet's Prey, it's another one, and it talks about the polygamous fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints.
Jim Jeffers?
Takes aim at Warren Jeffs.
Warren Jeffs, sorry.
Warren Jeffs.
Yeah.
You tend to see these though. They're separate groups, or they're sects of the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, Seventh-day Adventists,
Well,
the
that's what I say.
Mormons.
Everything kind of spins off of, if you
Wacky
look at like
fucking religious
religion. Well,
groups.
but if you look at religion in and of itself, you have kind of core religious beliefs, and then you have spin-offs of that,
Right.
of these, kind of more
Bastardized versions.
Versions of it. Right.
yeah, kind of, telling their own story of what they think that religion should be.
Right. There's a documentary called The People's Temple, The Life and Death of the People's Temple. The Family, Children of God, John Smithson's 94 Children of God interviews one family about being raised in the family, a cult in which sexually abusing children was common practice. Rose McGowan and Joaquin Phoenix were both born into the family and then fled with relatives, which I thought was interesting. Obviously, Waco, the Branch Davidians, Manson family, Heaven's Gate, The Untold True Story, the Source
What's
family.
the one that's the spinoff from Tiger King about the guy down in Myrtle Beach? The Doc Antle story. You look at that. I mean, that.
Oh yeah,
I was thinking
again
about that
another
got to be
cult.
considered a cult.
That's a cult. That's a good call.
Without
Matt,
a doubt, and that's a more recent one, you know.
Right. But those are just a few in terms of, obviously, people love shit like this and they want to go out and they can be conspiracy theorists and, like, for us, we're looking at it from the perspective of like the psychology of it, like what drives people to do it. For me, that's what it is. Like, I look at the four of us and I go, would any of you guys be in a cult? You're all smart, except for Haas, who doesn't like TSA feet, but I don't hold that against him. You know what I'm saying? Like, honestly, do you think there would ever be a position, except for Grinch, because we know he's been in a cult, military, would you ever find
I never
yourself?
said it was.
escaped.
I just said there were
I
some
escaped.
parallels there, man.
No, but I'm saying, do you think you could be coerced into being in a cult under the
I
right
think
conditions?
to Grinch's point, there's people way smarter than me that have gotten sucked into this. So can I honestly say no? I don't believe I could. I don't think that I would. And some of the ones that we've talked about, you can look at them and go, yeah, okay, that doesn't make any fucking sense to me. But maybe there's one that comes along that does appeal to you, right? So I'd like to say no, but I'm sure most of the people that have gotten pulled into cults probably may have said the same thing at one point.
Yeah, I'm sure Reverend Jones didn't go, hey, come join my cult. We're eventually going to drink Kool-Aid laced with cyanide, right? It was.
No, he should have gone with rum. It's much better.
Free love, right? You can leave all all that shit in your past, racism, bigotry, hate.
But it wasn't, he didn't sell it as, come drink my Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. It
right.
was,
That's what I'm saying.
You have to die to transcend to that next level. And when you do, all of these, you're going to leave your worldly possessions behind and have all these other unworldly possessions.
Yeah. My point is, I don't think he pulled people in by saying that, because I think a mildly intelligent people would go,
well, no, because that's a really bad sales pitch.
That's what I'm saying. So
you have to lead with something else.
Right.
I mean,
there's 70% of our group is women. You can
I think
have
we've
sex
got the
with
wrong
anyone
guy
you
in charge
want.
of marketing of our podcast here.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said for systematic brainwashing, right? I mean, you just keep reinforcing it. Like at Jonestown, the speakers were blaring his bullshit, all day, all
and
night.
Peer pressure too, right? I mean,
Well,
people.
Right. And then you stir up the, hey, if you hear of anybody's thinking of leaving, you create that paranoia, so nobody will talk and question.
Right.
Because it's almost like in phases, right? You got to have something that's just you can truly hang your hat on to begin with. It's easy to buy into, and then it evolves.
Well, it evolves and then devolves, right?
You're right. And then it reaches this crescendo. Because, I mean, going back to Heaven's Gate, if I recall, there was no Haley Bop is the end. It became the answer probably once they knew that the scrutiny was just going up and up and up. Jonestown came to an end because they killed a fucking member of Congress.
And they had to do something.
Yeah. So, like, these were not planned endings in the sense of like it's going to happen specifically from the get-go,
right?
Which just speaks to the fact it's fucking garbage and bullshit, because it became the plan when out of an extremist necessity.
It's the same thing with Waco, right?
Waco,
I mean,
right.
I'm pretty sure that that wasn't their plan wasn't to die 50 days after. They probably, you would have never heard of them if they hadn't tried to serve that warrant in the fucked up method they tried to serve it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
which, that's a whole other thing to unpack.
I mean, right.
You and I kind of talked about that in chat. They knew you were coming. Somebody leaked.
Yeah,
not somebody. We know who.
Well, yeah,
the mailman.
Right,
mailman.
How the fuck do you think that's gonna go?
And you had an undercover agent that was like racing out to meet them on the road. He's like, no, they
stop.
know.
They're armed.
And it's one of those like, well, we're gonna have a confrontation with the government. I foresee it. Yes, because you're gathering a bunch of fucking weapons.
Right.
Like, you've made this a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
And anybody with half a brain should be able to see that. but you seem to have been pretty convincing.
Well, none
Yeah,
of these, obviously,
by
they're
the-
not the first and they won't be the last. And I'm sure there are plenty of cults out there we don't even know about.
Well, and that was one of the things I was, kind of doing some research this morning. Nowadays it's actually more prevalent because you have the online presence. You don't have to be in Jonestown to be a member of, the People's Temple, right? You can be a member of a cult online, all across the world and maybe not even realize it to some extent.
The New York Times posted an article, The Psychology of the Cult Experience, where this individual, Dr. Singer, estimates there are between 25 and 3,000 2,500 and 3,000
I was
cults
like,
in the United
wow.
States, with dozens of small cults, too numerous to keep track of. The number of cult membership nationally wanes somewhere between 300,000 to 3 million, according to this article.
Does anybody know what the total population of the Republican cult is?
Too many.
So do you think they do like Rush? Do they put bids and that kind of thing?
See if you can even get in.
Yeah.
Just going back to the cult, would you buy into it? My answer is as of today a hard no. Because
Right.
they don't have any, they're not offering shit that I'm looking for. I don't need an answer to what it's all about. And I would beg the question of everybody who's like, ultimately we killed ourselves. Then why'd you fucking live in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
What did it matter? What did it matter?
Well,
I
but
think-
again,
Suffer from this human.
that's where
Like what?
that's where we have, the term cult is used. We're using it in one specific scenario where, that again, that deviant behavior and the end result, right? There can be millions of other cults that you could be a member of, and maybe in some cases not even realize it.
Well,
Right?
and I thought
if you're just looking at the
Are fraternities and sororities cults?
yes.
fanatic,
I mean, you were in one,
fan
brother. You tell
bases.
me.
Yeah.
I
Probably.
don't know in terms of
Probably.
Mac or Grinch. I've never been in one, but you have. I don't know if Grinch, were you in a fraternity in college?
No, I wasn't.
Okay, so Haas, would you consider fraternities to be cultish? Yes. Okay. Well, then now you just answered your own question, brother.
Well,
To some
that.
degree, yeah.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me, but I mean,
just-
because I was thinking, would I? And to Grinch's point, yeah, when I was younger, yeah,
You did.
because I joined a fraternity. But to further Grinch's point, as I've gotten older and wiser, I like to think and believe, I don't seek the kind of answers and I don't seek the kind of things that lifestyle provides or entices.
But
I
again, we're talking specific scenarios where, again, if we look at just the term cult overall, you're a pretty big fan of the South Carolina Gamecock cult.
Well,
You
all right.
know,
So
I mean-
as a serious follow-up to that, I haven't used the term Venn diagram in a while, and I really want to.
Time to throw it out there.
Everybody
Oh my
wait.
God, I have missed out.
Silence
I
across
know.
the room.
Like Chick-fil-A.
There are aspects of a cult that are just like any other organization that encourages a certain type of organizational behavior. That doesn't make them a cult.
Right.
That means there are certain traits that overlap. And this is why, going back to the like, is something cult-like? I mean, well, sure. It's by its nature, it has a uniform. It teaches a certain behavior. They're like your haircut. It's designed to strip down individuality so it's organizationally focused. So yes, I mean, we certainly saw that with a Heaven's Gate. They wore freaking uniforms and their weird shit with the, the patch and all that. Like, but the Branch Davidians didn't. I mean, they had basically everyday clothes. Jim Jones didn't have a haircut standard and that kind of thing. It was more behaviorally focused. And so that's why I'm like, if you say, is it like it? In my mind, I cut that word and just focus on the attributes that encourage a certain type of behavior.
Oh,
Well,
okay, so like, what
I
about
wanna-
the Masons or the Elks Lodge
The
or
Illuminati.
Belay? You're right. I mean, because I kind of put those in the same under the same umbrella as I would a fraternity or sorority, right? Like the fraternal order of police. I mean, these organizations where that's the whole point is you no longer have self-identity.
Like-minded.
Right. It's all so centric and focused on the organization.
But
And
again,
that's what
I think that's where you go back to, typically when you think of a cult, you're thinking of that deviant behavior, where it ends badly.
See, you guys
somebody.
keep saying the deviant behavior, and what I keep thinking of is intent. What is the intent? what is the intent of the organization? If the intent is to do good and provide, safety and comfort and food and support, that's fine. But you're
And
right.
that, like you look at it, I mean, the Branch Davidians, that may have been the intent initially.
Once the intent becomes malicious or deviant, then I think you start falling into cult territory, in my opinion.
Well, this is
Agreed.
interesting to me. So I'm pulling from an article here. What is a cult? 4 types of cults and common characteristics
Mhm.
from Masterclass is the website.
Yeah, I saw that, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so the word cult descends from the Latin cultus, an ancient word encompassing the concepts of adoration, education, and cultivation. Those aren't bad things in principle.
Right.
Right.
It's the application of those that become a problem.
Well, and that's why I say the term cult, to that point, encompasses a lot of things that are good and can be good. It's just typically associated with negative, scenarios. Like you look at, Heaven's Gate, People's Temple, the Branch Davidians, or again, maybe the second, iteration of the Branch Davidians. Sorry, go ahead, Grinch. Finish your article.
Well, by
No,
the
I'm gonna
19th
interrupt him.
century, it evolved to mean an unorthodox group of zealous and eccentric believers.
Right.
I mean, it's how it gets used in the popular culture is what that's the baggage that starts hanging on the word.
Right.
It's like he says, a movie has a cult following, and he's like, that doesn't imply anything.
Not a negative implication. And this is one of the reasons I don't think
real quick, you didn't answer the question of, do you think you could get sucked into a cult?
I'm about to.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you. And this is one of the reasons, me personally, I don't think so. And the other 3, I don't think either, because what makes individuals from a psychological standpoint susceptible to brainwashing to be pulled into cults? Weak sense of identity, which I don't think any of the 4 of us have. Okay. Tend to experience excessive guilt, which I don't think any of the 4 of us necessarily do. Great self-doubt, which I don't think any of the 4 of us have. And traditionally, black and white thinking. And those are the 4 characteristics that they claim. If you possess those, you're more likely to be successfully brainwashed. And so when people are those authoritarian,
but now you're talking black and white. And I think there's a lot of gray there for people that can be.
Of course, I'm sure you may not have all 4 of those, but I don't think any of us possess those qualities, at least not that I've seen in the last 30 plus years. Now, when you're alone at home on the shitter in the dark by yourself, yeah, you may have doubt.
And who's at home alone on the shitter in the dark? That
when you're sitting on the toilet and the power goes out,
like
you're like,
recipe for catastrophe.
No, but I don't think.
Hold on, how does that go bad? I mean, you're already sitting.
Right. That's a good thing. You don't got to find your way around in the dark.
On the shitter in the dark.
All I'm saying is I don't think any of the 4 of us necessarily possess any of those traits, much less all of those traits. So that's why I don't think I would be susceptible to a cult. And as Haas said, there's no question I have currently that a cult would answer for me, that I would seek out a cult to answer that question religiously, spiritually, ideologically. No. So no, I don't.
Any of that belonging, like, fuck off.
No. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, that's a cult. Would you join a gang?
I mean, aren't we technically a gang?
Of course we are. We're a cult to a certain degree.
We're the cripples.
There you go, homie.
Because we're too old.
The cripples.
In current society, usually it's based around motorcycles or other things, hobbies like that.
Yeah.
I don't have anything that correlates to a gang that I'm aware of.
Right.
It's not a no, like outright. I just don't know what value.
If we could ever get Mac to join on the regular, we could be a video game.
I mean, you're right. We're more like
Mac.
a club.
We're a club.
Warzone's coming out with the World Series of Warzone, $1.2 million competition. If you want to join us and jump in,
I gotta fucking download something else now. Jesus,
for 1.2 million, brother.
Well, I mean, divided by 4, obviously.
Okay, look.
Let's hold on.
And then less 50%, 55%.
It will not be divided by
taxes.
4 equally because Grinch is going to carry most of the
Well,
team.
No. I mean, he
we're
could.
gonna
But here's the thing, though, Mac. It could still be enough after taxes and division to pay for that pool in the backyard.
Fuck yeah, it could.
Oh,
Or a whole new house that
That's
has
the
a
problem.
master on Main.
So you've missed selling.
We are
we
way
could
off
get you
the
a Kenny Masters Sea-Doo to go in the pool that you
That's
were
it.
right
The panty dropper.
That's it. All right, let's back on topic. But no, so answer your question, Mac. No, I don't think I would be susceptible. I don't imagine any of the three of you would be. And you can make the argument, well, Grinch went in the military 20 plus years ago, had a different mental state at the time. Maybe that's why he bought into that. That's fine. Haas was in a fraternity, different mental state 25 years ago. That's fine. But I think we've all said today, if somebody were doing it today, no. And I don't see myself doing it 25 years ago either. I was just at a different place in terms of my thought process.
You were the leader of a cult 25 years ago.
Yeah,
Well,
my family.
all right. Now, all right. Let me clarify. There is a cult I would join.
Okay.
The cult that believes we're in a simulation, because we are.
I can't disagree with you, man. We are in the Matrix, bro.
We're in the fucking Matrix.
We are in the Matrix, bro.
But just not John Wick 4.
I just don't know why everybody can't see it. But the next comic that comes by, I'm offing myself and I'm hopping on.
It had to come back to John Wick 4.
I disregard any John Wick 4 comments.
I
moving
think
forward.
on
Well, that's
that
our
note,
next podcast. So
we
that's
can
good.
call
Shit
this
show.
we can call this one to an end if that's
That
where
one's-
we've now
that one's-
gone. John
that one's
Wick 4.
horrible.
Those that like
movie.
John Wick 4 are a cult. That's what Haas is saying.
I'm not
TSA
saying they're-
feet and John Wick 4.
No, I mean,
Deviant behavior.
no, because to be in a cult,
Just
you have
go
to have
there.
a high
Just go there.
intellectual acumen.
Get on your island.
And
Put your-
if you
put
have a
your
high
defenses
intellectual
up.
acumen, you are not enjoying
Watching-
John Wick 4 by any stretch of the imagination.
But
Okay.
did you enjoy any of the John Wicks?
Yes, I enjoyed.
Because
the
I
first
watched
three
I watched
the
immensely.
first one, and I'm
Oh,
like,
what-
Yeah,
what were we
even
talking
Maggie's
about?
like, even the first one, I don't even know. Look, we have now gone way off the rails. I think it's time to pull this one to a
Not
close.
way off. I
You
mean,
know,
there's
we've gone-
parallels.
We wouldn't. Why? Because John Wick 3 is what? No, I was about to say it's parallelum, but it's what? Parabellum? What is the
Mhm,
what?
something like that.
Parabellum. That's
Parallelogram.
close. Parallelogram. John Wick 3. Go see it. Parallelogram.
He brings in Khan Academy, and they teach all the kids math,
There you go.
geometry.
Although I'm a little concerned that Masterclass has a thing on cults, like who would go out and actually take that masterclass, but clearly someone does.
Someone who wants to start a
Start a
motherfucking
cult.
cult.
how do I
Right.
go about
Yeah.
doing this?
I mean,
Exactly.
was it?
It's under science and tech, by the way.
I mean, it's there. Shit. Look, at the end of the day, you know, 30-year anniversary. I mean, we were there. I would say we lived through it, but it was on the TV. And it was an interesting way to kind of watch this unfold, being on the TV every night, and then obviously
I
how
think-
it culminates.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point thinking back though, and it's not just how you got your media and your news at the time, right? Because it was kind of a, every night at 6 p.m. you were tuning in to see what was going on.
Yes.
Because there weren't, hourly updates, on your phone at the time.
Right. Although I do want to point this out because I spoke with him this week. My
David
brother,
Koresh?
my brother
Interesting.
Loki, I was talking to him about it. Now, my brother was in the Marines at the time, and he was actually deployed overseas when all of this was going on. And he got back on his deployment right at the end of the standoff in April. And I was asking him about it. He's like, I don't remember much about it because I was not stateside at the time. He said, but I will say this, I was in the mall in Jacksonville, North Carolina, because he was stationed there at New River. And he said, I actually purchased my TV at a store in the mall based on the picture quality of the Davidian compound on fire.
Oh my god,
That
I'm like,
sounds
you
about
what?
right, actually.
Because I
that's
walked in,
so on
like,
brand.
it's like,
So-
Best
There's so
Buy
many
or
things
whatever,
to
all the
unpack
TVs
there, right?
have
That-
all
that
the
he bought-
same thing.
He bought
on
a
the
TV
TV.
at the mall.
oh my god.
Well,
that's so on
again,
brand.
it's if you've been to Jacksonville in the early 90s, there was
Well, yeah, I know. I'm
fuck all there.
I'm saying, how far we've come.
right. But he's like, I was walking through the store in the mall to buy a TV, and it was like a wall of TVs, and they were all showcasing the fire. And he goes, I found the one that had the best picture quality, and I bought it. I was like, Jesus Christ, man.
Next
I'm
time
like,
we
really?
burn something down, I want to be able to see it in,
Yeah, in
4K.
fucking 4K. Exactly. So I thought that
you
was
just
funny.
you just kind of you were giving me some things to spin the brain up on while you were talking, which is I started to say this going back to the military, which is I've heard the term, and maybe it's a distinction without a difference, but I view the military as tribal.
Okay.
And so I think while there are sociological aspects that carry over to all of this, I tend to think of the military as being more tribal mindset, which kind of makes me think of like the Native Americans. Like there was an order, there was a structure, they thought and did things a certain way. That was what their society was based on. It's how they organized, it's how they, did what they did.
How well did that work out for them?
Well, Yeah. I mean, so I guess to me, it's curious that I wonder what the limit in terms of population size is for a cult.
Yeah, I don't
Is
know.
it 10? The
Then
four
again,
elements mentioned in
it's
the
a
master
man-made
class.
construct because it's a man-made word, really. I mean, if you
Well,
like you said, if you look at the initial definition of cult and going back to cultists, it includes and encompasses a whole ton of shit that has kind of gotten filtered out through the years to what we now think of as a cult.
Cults, right?
well, and this is where I think I might be starting to frame out cult, which is so 4 characteristics again from the same article: authoritarian control, extremist beliefs, isolation from society, veneration of a single individual. Now, Heaven's Gate technically too, but I think it really pivoted around whatever
Marshall Applewhite.
Marshall Applewhite. Where I think you start to draw the back end of like, yes, they are a cult, and you almost give them this moniker after the fact.
Right.
Maybe once you become aware of it, you do. Like, I don't know that as I saw the Branch Davidians, like at the time, I was like cult. That wasn't. I just
Right.
considered them the Branch Davidians, and then the final outcome is when I began to think of them as a cult.
Right.
Where you might cross over and say, where something was niche, but now it is maybe more of a religious approach or a broader appeal with good intentions or otherwise, is if that centerpiece of it all does come and go, but the belief system remains in place and it moves on. So, Mormonism, Scientology, people can, I don't know, they must like something they're getting from it. And to the best of my knowledge, they aren't doing anything bad.
Right.
To the best of my knowledge, and I don't know shit about really either one. I mean, I've got a cousin that's Mormon and she seems very happy and loving family. So I don't have anything against Mormons, or Jehovah's Witness or some of these other organizations that I might offhandedly be like, fucking cult,
Till they come knocking on your door.
But to
As
me,
they
I guess
are.
that's maybe where you all have helped me get to the end of my thinking of this, to go
Thanks.
cult versus religion versus a broader belief system.
Versus military, which is tribal. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, gentlemen, as always, I appreciate your time, your effort, putting in the hours, putting in the grind, looking at these articles, watching these shows so that we can come on here and we can talk about it intelligently, if that's in point of fact what we did. Obviously, to anybody out there in the listening range, if you're listening to this, feel free to go out and check out some of these documentaries about these different cults. You can formulate your own opinion. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line at the Full Horseman at aspiratoddebate.com, let us know what you think of cults. What's a cult? Is the military cult, or fraternities cults, or families cults? Are cults? We'd love to know. And if you think
Are you in a cult?
if you're in a cult, if you
We
think
already
you're
know you're in the Matrix, but are you in the
in a
cult?
Gotcha. But we'd love to hear from you. Or maybe you've got a drink you'd like to try. Maybe you've got a special potion, Kool-Aid, that you think we should try, sans the cyanide, because I'm just not doing that.
Yeah.
But if you've got a drink you'd like us to try, feel free to send it our way at the Full Horseman at aspiratoddebate.com. And if that's not enough for you, you can go out to our website at aspiratoddebate.com. All of the drinks that we have, all of our episodes are in the vault there. 170 something episodes. I mean, there's a lot. 170 something. I'd have to go back and look.
We apparently like talking.
I'm a little
do.
concerned because now you bring that up. Maybe I'm in the Grinch cult because I was
Maybe
the
you
only
are.
one that drank the one hit wonder.
Yeah, you are.
He managed to convince me that was a
Sucker.
Oh, there were some others that were involved in your psychological
Demise.
manipulation.
That's right.
Don't let them.
Don't
off
point the
hook.
finger at him. He just came to it a lot easier than the rest of us. It was just very natural for him to
natural
say,
to
hey, do
him.
this.
He's charismatic.
Right. But yes, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it as always. Love doing this with you week in and week out. I love you guys. Can't wait to do this again next week. So thank you very much. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the A Spirited Debate podcast series or any affiliated podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests involved and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the host or guests may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity, unless explicitly stated. While guests are invited to listen, listeners acknowledge that they are not being provided professional advice from the podcast or its guests. The content within the parameters of A Spirited Debate podcast series or any affiliated podcast are for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any views or opinions are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual.